person.
Okay.
Are you here?
All right. Well, then I'll keep that and ask you to win the prize package. So. All right, thank you.
Okay, we're going to start. Most people are gone or something. Anyway, this talk is about whatever happened to the woolly mammoths. We've heard a lot about mammoths here, but they went extinct. And I'm going to focus mainly in Siberia, but they were actually all across the northern hemisphere. So, an overview of this talk is there's many mammoth mysteries associated, with the woolly mammoth, especially in Siberia. They're unexplained by mainstream scientists. The one idea, the quick freeze theory, is not likely, and evidence points to extinction at the end of the post-flood ice age. And the post-flood ice age deduced from the Bible can't account for the mysteries. So that's an overview. Here's a woolly mammoth. We've all seen this. This is from literature. It had spiraling in tusks, a lump on its head, kind of a lump on its back, and a curved back. And it had 1 meter length hair, short ears, and adapted for the cold. These are adaptations for the cold. So we're going to have a geography lesson because we're going to be talking about Siberia. See, my cursor works. Okay, this is western Siberia. These are the Ural Mountains right in here, where they have found cave art. It's the furthest east, as far as I know, of cave art. And it's especially eastern Siberia, which is higher altitude. This is color-coded by altitude. The green is low altitude. And most of the woolly mammoths in Siberia are along the Arctic Ocean in the low altitude areas. The mountains were glaciated, but not the lowlands. These are the New Siberian Islands right here. And this is Wrangel Island, where the last mammoth is believed to have lived. And so that's Siberia. Now, mammoths are cold adapted. There's some people that thought that, hey, it's a tropical animal because it had no oil glands, for instance. But what does it have long hair for if it's not cold adapted? Small ears, an anal flap, and there are oil glands in their skin. The previous samples they had when they said there were no oil glands was mainly because they had poor representatives or carcasses. But there are oil glands, so it was adapted to the cold. Now there's a lot of mysteries to these Siberian mammoths. One of them is bones and tusks are in permafrost, which is permanently frozen ground. What are they doing there? How did they get there? Evolutionists think that permafrost has been there for millions of years. And the bones and tusks are generally well preserved, indicating rapid burial. And there's frozen carcasses. How do you get jam in a carcass into the permafrost? And they have stomach contents, and they're only half digested. Some of the stomach contents are from plants that live there today, and some from plants that live a lot further south. But the stomach contents indicates rapidly frozen. Now here's a quote from an early scholar thinking about this issue, Henry Howarth, The Mammoth and the Flood, 1887, and perplexed over how you get an elephant in permafrost. Now, by no physical process known to us can we understand how soft flesh could thus be buried in ground while it is frozen as hard as flint, without disintegrating it. We cannot push an elephant's body into a mass of solid ice or hard frozen gravel and clay without entirely destroying the fine articulations and pounding the whole mass into a jelly. Nor would we fail in greatly disturbing the ground in the process. So, he's perplexed. So, how many mammoths are we talking about, first of all? Are we talking about just a few that could have wandered up there by chance during the Ice Age? Or millions? Well, if you go to the researchers, the Russian researchers who did the research, they will tell you that there are millions of them in the permafrost. Millions of mammoths. Anyway, there's more Siberian mysteries. There's not only woolly mammoths that lived there, there was a wide diversity of animals. In fact, I counted up and published in one of my resources, there's probably about 40 different mammals that lived in Siberia during the Ice Age. Also, you have burrowing animals like beavers, ferrets. It's hard to burrow into permafrost. I think it can be done when it melts at the top, but it freezes in the winter. Most mammals were grazers. They ate grass. There's not a grassland up there today. Also, wildlife specialists would consider them well-dressed giants, healthy animals, in other words. And most large animals went extinct at the end of the Ice Age. 66% of all mammals over 100 pounds went extinct globally. 66%. And some mammals that used to live there that didn't go extinct now live much further south. So, big hint, it's a much different environment up there than it is today. There's several deductions you can make from this evidence. It was a grassland with a wide diversity of plants, with a wide diversity of animals. You had a wide diversity of nutritional needs, so you needed a wide diversity of plants. And that implies a fertile soil, unlike today. It's mostly a bogland up there because the permafrost melts in the top 1 or 2 feet, and it has nowhere to drain because it's ice below there, so it becomes kind of a bogland in the summer. And bog vegetation is not healthy for grazers. And it's a high-quality habitat. And the competition is light, suggesting a long growing season, unlike today. And continuing, this all implies snowfall light and melts early. Milder, relatively dry winter, and the summer bogs would be rare, suggesting totally that there's little or no permafrost until the end of the Ice Age. Now that is mind-blowing to uniformitarian scientists who believe in the present is the key to the past. And there's permafrost there today, so they assume it's been like that for millions of years. Some evidence that there was little or no permafrost at the beginning of the Ice Age is the saga antelope. It's different than the pronghorn. Actually, I found out that the pronghorn antelope that we have today is really not an antelope in the classification system. I think they classify it in the Bovidae family. It looks like an antelope to me, but anyway, I can't argue with biologists. Anyway, the current distribution of saga antelope is rather restricted. It's that solid line in there. Historically, it was the dashed line, but during the Ice Age, they extended all through Asia, even up in the permafrost areas of Siberia, the lowlands of Alaska, northern Alaska, and even the northwest Yukon Territory. And the significance of this, an antelope needs wide open prairies with no permafrost. It has small hooves, so it's not going to be able to negotiate permafrost or bogs. a hint that that lacked permafrost when the saga antelope was up in Siberia. But that's not all the mysteries. Brian Young referred to some of them, like some were found standing upright. How does that happen? 5 animals are known to have suffocated. These are some of the carcasses by the condition of the blood in the carcass. And some of the bones are broken. On the Beresavaka mammoth, a famous mammoth up there, its right forearm was broken and its pelvis was broken. And the New Siberian Islands are a huge amount of bones up there, mostly of mammoths. And the lowlands of Alaska, Siberia were not glaciated. So these are more Siberian mysteries to explain. A quote from an early explorer, Tomachov, said this, referring to Brandt, who was the early explorer. Brandt was very much impressed by the fact that remnants of the mammoth, carcasses and skeletons alike, sometimes were found in poses which indicated that the animal had perished standing upright as though they had bogged. Unfortunately, bog vegetation is rare around these animals. So it's not bog, it didn't, I'm sure some sank in a bog, but it doesn't appear that they were bogged. And here's the Beresavaka mammoth. That was how it was found, in a general standing position. Now there's a great book you can read about this by Fitzenmeyer, about how they got this animal out of northeast Siberia by sleds, cutting it up and sledding it south down to the Trans-Siberian Railroad, several thousand kilometers in the fall and early winter. Could you imagine sledding through Siberia in the middle of winter? I mean, it's an amazing feat. It's a great book. It's called Mammoth and Man or something. I forgot the exact name of the book. Anyway, here's another animal that they believe was bogged. This is a Selerican horse. And the bottom right panel was how it was found in a gold mine. The hooves were sticking out from the ceiling. And so they would put their lamp on that to light their way through the tunnel. Scientists found out about it and so dug it up. And it was found under 26 feet of debris, and it was headless. So this is their scenario, that the horse sunk in a bog in a general standing position, but didn't sink far enough. Its head was sticking out, and a cave lion came by and ate off the head. And it was headless, and then it was covered by 26 feet of debris. So that's their story. So woolly mammoth extinction is a major mystery of mainstream Earth science. What are millions of mammoths doing in a climate that they couldn't live today? So this is the problem. And why did they disappear? Larry Agenbrod and Lisa Nelson in the book Mammoths said, why did mammoths disappear from the earth? This question remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of the past. There's 3 categories of mammoth extinction hypotheses. I'm not going to go into this in any depth. There's the uniformitarian, present processes over millions of years idea. And then we have some non-creationist catastrophists. Henry Howarth, which I quoted earlier, thought it was a tidal wave, huge tidal, tsunami, it should be called a tsunami, but rolling over there and covering up. Immanuel Velikovsky with Mars, and I can't remember how it goes, moving through the solar system and coming close to the Earth and causing all these catastrophes. And these 2 guys. And then we have the creationist catastrophist. And there's generally 3 camps. One camp believes in a quick freeze early in the flood. Another camp believes a quick freeze at the end of the post-flood rapid ice age. Another camp believes in slow to moderate freeze at the end of the post-flood rapid ice age. So the uniformitarian hypotheses, they sometimes downplay the number of mammoths, and they will admit maybe a little warmer during an interglacial. We're in an interglacial. How is a little warmer temperatures in Siberia really going to help? Or even if it was a little colder during an ice age period and froze all the bogs, then what are they going to eat? So here is a uniformitarian scientist writing in Science, William Farrand. The woolly mammoth data can be adequately explained by the everyday processes which we can observe around us. Oh yeah? I think these guys really are clueless on all this data. So they got three main problems. First of all, why live in Siberia today? If the past is the same as the present, winters would be bitterly cold and dark, and it'd be a marshland in the summer. And what would all these mammals eat? Millions of them. There's no green vegetation until July. Bog vegetation is partly toxic to grazers. And the vegetation would be frozen for 9 months. And then how did they die and become buried in the permafrost? Those are three main problems they have, and they apparently, as far as I've read, haven't got too far in solving these problems. And when you realize the dietary requirements of an elephant, which should probably be maybe a little greater than a mammoth, because a woolly mammoth was a little smaller than at least the African elephant. They need 650 pounds of feed a day, 35 to 50 gallons of water a day. Millions of them? Yeah, okay. Some Russian experts who've done a lot of the research say this: there would be no place for mammoths in the present Arctic tundra of Eurasia with its dense snow driven by the winds. So, let's talk a little bit about us creationists. The quick freeze, one of them was a quick freeze early in the flood, and I had to evaluate that. And I've already gone through these others. So the idea of a quick freeze, it was based on Bird's Eye Frozen Food Company that said to freeze mammoth flesh, these carcasses, you'd have to drop the temperature down to about 150 degrees below zero instantaneously. So you got a mammoth sitting out there eating grass and buttercups. Yeah, buttercups, because they find buttercups in their stomach and their mouth, so they make a kind of a big deal out of that. But buttercups grow in Siberia today, by the way. But there's evidence against, first of all, there's evidence against a flood death. Then I'll get to the quick freeze idea. Mammoths are part of a post-flood northern hemisphere steppe community. They're found all over the northern hemisphere. So how could they die in the flood? They're generally absent in glaciated areas. They're drawn on cave walls in the Ural Mountains as well as in Europe. And the bones of woolly mammoths are on top of glacial till in northwest Siberia. As the ice melted back, the mammoths moved in, and that would indicate ice age time frame. And if they died early in the flood, they'd be at the bottom of the sediments, but they're all found at the top in permafrost. So, evidence against a flood death. I don't think there's very many creationists that believe that anymore, maybe about one or two. I probably shouldn't even address it, but anyway, I do. Anyway, here's the woolly mammoth distribution, the general location in the red. Sometimes their bones are found out in the ocean water off of Eastern Asia. They're found in the North Sea. They're found generally down in the central U.S., but there's a lot of overlap. But that's the general distribution. They're not found in the where the center and the northern part of the Laurentide ice sheet in eastern Canada and central Canada existed in the Scandinavian ice sheet, indicating they're associated with the Ice Age and not the flood. And there's evidence against a quick freeze. The idea of a quick freeze is frozen instantly, generally sometimes in a standing position. If that was the case, you'd find millions of frozen carcasses, but the number of carcasses you find actually up there are very small, less than 100. And their definition of a carcass is any scrap of flesh. Any scrap of flesh. Also, they show partial decay of the carcasses, like they didn't instantly froze, they froze slower. And because there's partial decay. Also, there's fly pupae associated with the bones and carcasses. In other words, there was time for flies to lay their eggs. That's not an instantaneous freeze. Also, when you analyze the stomach contents of maybe a couple dozen that are generally whole carcasses, you find that that there's different seasons of death based on the quality of the stomach contents. And the stomach contents are partially preserved in the U.S. mastodon. And I forgot all about this. This is the burning tree mastodon I'm referring to. And if you can have partially decayed vegetation in the stomach of a mastodon found in a peat bog in Ohio, what's the big deal of finding them in the permafrost in Siberia? So there's evidence against a quick freeze. So it wasn't during the flood, it wasn't early in the flood, it wasn't during a quick freeze, but I believe, and this I advocate see, a slow to moderate freeze at the end of the post-flood rapid ice age. So how can the post-flood ice age account for the mammoth mysteries? Well, first of all, I'm going to quickly go over the ice age. Many of you were here last night. The requirements for an ice age, you need cooler summers, much greater snowfall, and it has to persist for many years. And so this is kind of how it works. Warm ocean at mid and high latitudes, powerful evaporation, volcanic dust in the upper atmosphere, or aerosols, really. I didn't do this slide, I'd reword it. And the reflectivity of the sunlight back to space, cooling the land, and for snow and sleet to rapidly form on the land. So that's the general outline of the ice age. And the requirements are, the requirements are met by the Genesis flood. Volcanic dust and aerosols cause a cooler summer by reflecting some of the sunlight back to space. The fountains of the great deep and volcanism cause a warm ocean after the flood, and the mechanism persists but wanes with time. It wanes because the ocean will cool off with time. There's two main cooling mechanisms of the ocean. Cold air moving over warm water will cool the ocean and warm the air. Also, during evaporation of the ocean surface, that cools the ocean. Evaporation is 3/4 of the cooling of the ocean, and that is the precipitation that formed at the same time. So those are the two cooling mechanisms, by contact with cold air and by evaporation. So this is the general location of the ice during the ice age. Notice it's absent in the lowlands of Alaska, and the same thing in central and northeast Siberia, just the mountains are glaciated. So that's the general location of the ice age. And this is I gave minimum and maximum for the cooling and heating terms with a change in temperature, change in time. So I got ranges, and I got the best estimate of 500 years to reach glacial maximum, and then it melts. But first of all, you got to know how much snow melts. So I based the same thing on how much snow falls over the water versus the land, how much falls in non-glaciated areas. So I gave ranges, and I get the best estimate is about 2,300 feet for the northern hemisphere average. Antarctica about 3,900 feet. And time to melt it, I gave ranges for the melting equation for a snow and ice cover, and the main variable was what's called the albedo, in other words, the reflectivity of the snow. So the range is about 40 to 100 years to melt the edge or the periphery. 70 years is the best estimate, but interior Canada, interior Scandinavia would melt slower, so it's 200 years. So the total time for an ice age is roughly 700 years. These are rough estimates. There's no way to be accurate. And we also know that Siberia, the winters would be a lot milder there. A man did a computer experiment by just taking off the sea ice of the Arctic Ocean, but keeping the temperature of the Arctic Ocean at the freezing point of seawater, which is minus 28 degrees Fahrenheit. And then he ran his computer and found out how much warmer were the winters without the sea ice. And these are what he got. At the North Pole, or near the North Pole, is 40 degrees. This is in centigrade, by the way. So that's close to 70 degrees warmer at the North Pole. In northern Siberia, it'd be 20 degrees centigrade or 38 degrees Fahrenheit warmer. Canada would be a lot warmer. But you still develop snow with warmer temperatures, I might add, because you might, instead of having 40 below up there, you have 10 below. But that's keeping the temperature of seawater at the freezing point of seawater. But what if the seawater was 80 degrees Fahrenheit right after the flood? Man, that'd cause a huge amount of heat that would spread into Siberia. So the winters would be very mild in Siberia, and that would allow animals to spread through Siberia into Alaska, into the United States, Central America, and South America. That would allow a lot more animals to migrate over the Bering Land Bridge. And you'd keep those areas next to the Arctic Ocean warm by what's called warm onshore flow. That's a meteorological term when you have winds coming off the ocean. If the ocean water is warm, the ocean water heats the air, and the air spreads in, and it'd be warm air. So you'd help keep Siberia a lot warmer in the wintertime and with cooler summers. So it'd end up being a pretty good environment for a lot of animals. So is there enough time to produce many millions of mammoths at the end of the Ice Age? Well, I did a crude estimate based on the doubling time of various preserves in South Africa. These preserves, they had poaching and all kinds of stuff. So, but I'm just going to talk about the bottom one there. It doubled in one. It doubled every 10 years. They reproduce slowly, and so if they double in 10 years, in 300 years, which is 30 times, and it's like hitting your computer, doubling it every time, you quickly get up into billions by geometric progression, if none of them died, assuming. I'm just showing the potential that we can have millions of mammoths during a short ice age based on the population of elephants in Africa. But what would the climate be like in Siberia during a post-flood rapid ice age? Very changeable, in short. Here's this graph right here that I use for continental areas. With all that warm water, you'd have mild winters. The blue line is the temperature throughout the ice age. This line right here is the average temperature today. So early in the Ice Age, you'd have real warm temperatures. I better not say warm, I'll say mild. Temperatures early in the Ice Age, while the summers would be cooler because of reflecting from volcanic aerosols. But as time went on, ocean cooled, and it tended to dry out, less evaporation. So the winters would actually become colder and colder with time. In fact, they'd get so cold, they'd go colder than they are today up there. And these animals weren't adjusted to cold, as some people would think. And of course, with the decreasing volcanic aerosols from less volcanism going on during the flood, the summers would warm up gradually, and the ice would melt even with cold winters because of the summers. Most of the ice melts in the summer. So winter temperatures don't matter as long as the summers are warmer, are mild. So that's the average temperature. This is, by the way, this is an estimate based on meteorological reasoning. And here's the annual precipitation. Here's today's rate on the continents. And you'd have, because of that warm water giving off huge evaporation, you'd have so much water vapor, you'd have heavy precipitation, not only where it was glaciated, but in non-glaciated areas also. So it'd be heavy, but with time, as the ocean cooled off, evaporation becomes less. It's going to become actually drier than today at the end of the ice age. Very changeable climate. So based on that, we can postulate the area of Siberian permafrost. It forms because of winter temperatures. So as the winter temperatures cool off, the permafrost is going to gradually increase. So with time, it's going to start from at zero at the end of the flood. There would be no permafrost at the end of the flood by definition in our model. But as time went on, the winters get cooler. The permafrost is going to gradually build, and it's going to build. And by the end of the ice age, it's going to be extensive. In fact, it's going to be more extensive than it is today. And there's lots of evidence of this. Much of Europe had permafrost at the end of the ice age, clear down to Hungary and those places down there in southeast Europe. And then at the end of the ice age, you have a warm-up period, and some of the permafrost melts. And so the woolly mammoths would start off, I believe that the mammoth genes, DNA, were in the elephant kind. The elephant kind is Proboscidea, which is an order. And within them, I believe you had the DNA for elephants, mastodons, and mammoths. And with time, they differentiate. And then the mammoths come, and then their population starts off very slow because of that. And by geometric progression, their populations multiply and become very large. And by the end of the ice age, when it was colder winters, drier winters, windier winters, they went extinct. And 66% of animals over 100 pounds globally went extinct, even on South America and Australia. I think it's mostly drought in those places. So here's kind of the way it works. They spread from the Tower of Babel through Siberia down across the Bering Land Bridge. That's how animals would spread out northeast. And of course, they would spread across the Bering Land Bridge into the lowlands of Alaska and down the east slopes of the Rockies, east of the Rockies, between the Cordilleran ice sheet on the west and the Laurentide ice sheet on the east, through an ice-free corridor. Now, this ice-free corridor is due to what's called Chinook downslope winds in this area, which I'm very familiar with since I forecast them for 25 years at Great Falls, Montana. And that keeps the snow, melt the snow. Half the winter, you don't have snow at Great Falls, Montana, where I lived 27 years. It's the same way up in Alberta. So for quite a while, you'd have an open area there where the animals and man can come down the east slopes of the Rockies and spread way south, down into South America even. So let's get to the big question. How did the woolly mammoths die in Siberia? Well, first of all, they'd live up there because with a steppe climate, it would end up being a grassland. It's called the mammoth steppe by some uniformitarian paleontologists. But how did they die up there? And ended up in a standing position and into the permafrost? Well, the solution to the mystery of their extinction is found in the deposits surrounding the mammoths. What are they buried in? Well, you go to the experts who do the research up there, and these two Russian researchers said a particular interest for paleozoologists is the Edama, or it could be with a Y in front of it. This is actually a loess layer, as a rule, containing the largest amount of remains of late Pleistocene animals. They're buried in loess. That's windblown silt like you have around here. Now, the reason they find them in an Edama is actually a hill. After the permafrost melts, it melts in pockets and forms hollows called delasses up there. And what remains are called eudamas. So, and they're untouched permafrost that has not melted after the ice age. So that's where you find the majority of them. But that is windblown silt, loess. Dale Guthrie probably has is probably the best American scientist that understands this, and he wrote a book called The Frozen Fauna of the Mammoth Steppe. He says, like most of the Soviet Far East, large expanses of Alaska and the Yukon Territory were not glaciated during the Pleistocene. That's their ice age period. Because these areas were bounded on several sides by enormous glaciers and glacial outwash streams, today much of Beringia, translated eastern Siberia, Alaska, and the Yukon, is mantled with a thick deposit of aeolian windblown silt called loess. In some places, it's 200 feet thick in Siberia. So that's how they're buried there. So that gives us a lot more options to think about how to answer these questions. Why would you have, they're buried in dust storms, in other words. So why in the post-flood ice age would you have these dust storms? Winters are colder oceans, more sea ice, drier atmosphere. Also, as the ice is melting, it's cold up there still, but the tropical areas are warming. So you have a stronger north-south temperature difference. And in atmospheric science, that translates up into stronger east-west winds by what's called the thermal wind equation. So you have a lot stronger winds. This indicates powerful late ice age dust storms. So I did a little sleuthing about the Dust Bowl era in the 1930s. This might have been a picture that was taken close to here, by the way, because Kansas was part of the Dust Bowl. So you had a lot of big dust storms. Can you imagine getting caught in a field in something like that? Anyway, that can solve a lot of problems. Small to medium-sized dust storms can explain the bones and tusks buried rapidly after undergoing natural decay. Remember, you only have 100 carcasses. The vast majority of mammoths, they decayed normally, and they're bones and tusks. And so they'd be buried rapidly in the windblown silt. And they'd end up in the permafrost. And the permafrost, which is forming, would rise up into the windblown silt and freeze them from the bottom up and the top down from strong cold fronts. And the bones and tusks would generally be well preserved, just with small to medium-sized dust storms. By that I mean maybe a dust storm that puts about that much dust in an area. But some of these dust storms were huge. There was dust blizzards in the Dust Bowl era that covered up fences and machinery and sometimes reached over the roofs of houses. Can you imagine your house after a dust storm looking like this? Now, some people in Kansas probably woke up to this if they could sleep through it. Anyway, this presents a possibility that strong dust storms can explain these other exotic mysteries. Well, how so? Stuck in a standing position in a dust drift. If you're a hairy elephant and you turn your back to the wind, the dust is going to blow and pack up around you. And I don't know if any of you have driven through deep snow drifts with your four-wheel drive. That drift is hard. It's not like powder snow. You can get stuck with a four-wheel drive in those things. Well, anyway, it'll pack tightly. And he'll breathe in the dust and suffocate. And he can freeze in there from the bottom up as the permafrost was increasing from moving from the ground up into the dust and from the top down. Is there evidence of suffocation by dust? Yeah, they found two-month-old baby woolly mammoths, found 5,000 kilometers apart. They died of asphyxia or suffocation, and the way they describe this is mud packed in their mouth, trunk, oral cavity, and lungs. Well, this mud is probably another name for windblown silt that became wet. And why was it packed all through their mouth, trunk, and oral cavity? You know, they gave some crazy idea of how they thought it happened, but it fit to a T, breathing in windblown silt and collecting in their mouth, trunk, oral cavity, and lungs, and dying of asphyxiation. And there's two mysteries left. How is the half-decayed stomach vegetation explained, and how are the broken bones explained? Well, from this book, Mammoth, Mastodons, and Elephants, author Gary Haynes says the digestive system, that's of a woolly mammoth, is based on post-gastric hindgut fermentation. Being a non-biologist, that simply means it was digested past the stomach in the intestines. The stomach is large, but serves mainly to store ingested food. Enzymes within the stomach partly break down the vegetation, partly break it down like we have observed in the vegetation of woolly mammoths in their stomach. But most nutrients are extracted in the huge cecum and large intestine, where microbes ferment the food remaining after gastric processing. It's likely that it's because of their unique digestive system that the stomach contents were half decayed. Of course, you're going to have to freeze it probably pretty fast, not a quick freeze, but pretty fast to preserve it in that state. And as far as broken bones, Larry Agenbrod says in this article, based on research at Hot Springs, South Dakota. How many been to Hot Springs, South Dakota to see the mammoth site? I was just there on the way down. I've been there, that's the third time, just refreshing my knowledge on it. Very impressive site. Anyway, he mentions some of them had broken leg bones too. And he says there's two processes to do this. Torsional stress, as providing to extricate a limb mired in mud, muck, or quicksand, etc., or trampling. Now, in this situation, trampling can be eliminated. So torsional stress. So as this dust is packing tight around them, they're trying to get out. And the torsional stress like this will break their bones. Also, you can break the big bones by permafrost. After it freezes, it faults. These two authors say again, after burial in the permafrost, the organic remains could have shifted vertically within a wide range owing to their physical properties and the features of the permafrost environment. It is now known that in frozen ground, bones and pieces of wood are sometimes shifted vertically by 10 to 15 meters along the boundary of the frozen ground and ice veins. So if the permafrost faults, you can fault through a bone and break a pelvis. So this is how I tentatively explain the broken bones. To sum it all up, I know this is probably hit and miss for you. Let's do a little cartoon here, thanks to Dan Letha, formerly of Answers in Genesis. There's your mammoth out there eating grass. In fact, because it was a grassland, it'd be a great environment for a huge amount of grazers. early and mid Ice Age. But by the late Ice Age, it was a totally different environment. So here comes the wind. And I'm turning my back to it, and lo and behold, I'm acting like a snow fence with snow. It's going to pack around me. On and on. I'm breathing it, and I die of suffocation. And I die in a general standing position. And more dust storms pile up all around me. And finally, I'm totally buried in the windblown silt. And the permafrost, which has been forming down below, and the colder air cooling the silt from above. And this only shows the permafrost coming up. And the mammoth ends up in the permafrost. And then you have a fault of the permafrost and break the pelvis. Meanwhile, while he's trying to get out, he broke his limb bone. This is specifically thinking of the Beresavaka mammoth that I showed you. So that, I believe, the post-flood ice age can explain the mammoth mysteries. But why can't mainstream geologists see the importance of the loess? Does much loess form in Siberia today? No, it's a bogland. That's the problem. But some of them give it a shot. Guthrie says in that book, Frozen Fauna of the Mammoth Steppe, these large bones could not be preserved by a few millimeters of annual Aeolian loess fall. In other words, he thinks maybe the average is a few millimeters, about the thickness of a dime. He's generous because actually today it's only local where you get windblown silt. In general, there's zero windblown silt in Siberia and lowlands of Alaska. But he says their preservation requires large quantities of reworked silt. You need a lot of dust storms to bury them and preserve them in the shape we observe them in. And they can't see because of their stretched out time scale. Just like with volcanism during the Ice Age, each one of these dust storms, when the environment was drier and cooler, would be small. And over 10,000, 100,000 years, they become insignificant. But what if all that windblown silt that is up to 200 feet thick in some of the river valleys can be telescoped within maybe 200 years? It becomes a powerful mechanism to explain all these mysteries. So the short time scale is another key to explaining mysteries that have been around for 200 years. Time is not a side issue, but crucial for solving mysteries. So the post-flood rapid ice age can account for the lowlands of Siberia not glaciated because of those warm winter keeping the snow mainly in the mountains. It explained why mammoths lived in Siberia, became a grassland early and mid ice age. There'd be abundance of food for grazers. And up there'd be a mix of warm and cold animals. I didn't talk much about this. This is another disharmonious association of animals from different environments living up there. It says how mammoths and other animals went extinct and explains all the Siberian mysteries. In conclusion, reasonable explanations for the many mammoth mysteries are provided by the post-flood rapid ice age. This ice age is a climatic consequence of Noah's flood. This supports the Bible and is against the present processes over millions of years alternative hypothesis. So if you want to know more about it, this is the main layman-friendly book, Frozen in Time, focusing on the woolly mammoth as well as the ice age. And of course, we have a children's sequel to Life in the Great Ice Age, focusing on why did the mammoths disappear, how did they die, going through some of this talk, and what was it like at the end of the Ice Age, in a fun storybook like Life in the Great Ice Age. And I've written a number of geology books since I've gone into that field, and Dr. Rob Carter and I did Biblical Geology 101. This is, if you don't have much familiarity with geology, you can learn from this book, basic geology, biblical geology, so you can see the features of the flood all over the earth as you travel around. If you open up your eyes and your mind, you can see it for yourself. The evidence is all over. And this was our point of writing this book. And Dr. John Reed and I wrote the kind of the chronology of the flood. What do we know about the pre-flood world? We know a lot based on coal and some fossils and the Bible. And then the early flood, what was that like? And then the late flood with the waters running off. It goes through this in a chronological way. And then what happened after the flood, based on the flood. So that's what this book is about. And many people are hung up on the age issue. I was asked I wasn't asked to write it, but a pastor came up to me and says, I'd like to know more about these dating methods because everything I read is just too complicated. So I attempted to write a book for someone with no science background going through the issue of time. Deep time deception, examining the case for millions of years. That's the basis behind that book. And because I'm interested in teaching children, I and others have been writing children's book in geology, like Examining Geology with Mr. Hibb. And we have one about dinosaurs. So that's all for the advertisements. And I want to leave you with this verse. Your faith should not rest on the wisdom of men. That's what evolution and deep time and uniformitarianism are, trying to explain everything without God. But it should be on the power of God. God has the power to create. He has the power to keep his word accurate. 95% of it's just straightforward reading. So our faith should be based on the power of God. And here's some websites where you can get some free information. I have a website down there, and that's it. Oard's is plural. My son was the webmaster, and so he put some of his pictures on it. Until recently, he's not into that anymore. So that's the website, and you get 2 free ebooks on there and color pictures. One on the runoff of the floodwaters, showing all the features of on the surface of the earth of what the floodwaters did when they ran off that they cannot explain. They attempt to explain, and I go into some of their attempts if they're reasonable. And I have a book on where's the flood post-flood boundary. And of course, creation.com and Answers in Genesis has over 10,000 articles for all scientific abilities, from children to professors. So take advantage of all the material we have out. This is a material-rich time that we can educate ourselves and our children and grandchildren to meet the real world, because the world depends on evolution being true. And because of that, they don't believe God exists, the Bible's false, and so that's fueling a lot of the isms that are going on in the world today and in the past. Anyway, I thank you, and I think I'm open for a few questions, if you have any. Yes?
How do they know what general date that the woolly mammoths went extinct?
Could you repeat that?
How do they have a specific time or date that the woolly mammoths went extinct?
Okay, they use carbon-14, usually. There's other dating methods, but for Ice Age time, but I don't think they're very good. The uranium-thorium method, I think, is probably pretty good, but they don't use that much for mammoth. Carbon-14, I'm in a committee of creation scientists that meet every 3 months globally, about 15 of us, trying to figure out the details of carbon-14. We haven't figured out some of the stuff, but what we generally believe is carbon-14 is accurate in a relative sense. And it's accurate in an absolute sense back to 3,000 years. But beyond 3,000 years to the time of the flood, which is about 4,500 years, we believe that you can telescope the carbon-14 dates that go from 3,000 years to 55,000 years, which is the maximum in their dating system. We can telescope those within 1,500 years after the flood. So they would date these mammoths by carbon, because they're carbon, they're not permineralized, they're bones. And so they would tell you that, oh, they died 10,000, 15,000 years in their time scale, but we would put that more like 4,000 years during the Ice Age. So we're still working on that, but that's how they date, mainly by carbon-14, which is actually a friend of ours, because there's carbon-14 in coal and diamonds. Carbon-14 in practically everything that has carbon in it. Why? What does that mean? In fact, you can read about more of that in Deep Time Deception. See, if something is older than 80,000 years, our instruments can't detect any more carbon-14 because it's been decayed out by 80,000 years. So if you find carbon-14 in anything with carbon in it, you find radioactive carbon, carbon-14, formed in the upper atmosphere, that means it's less than 80,000 years. And guess what? You find carbon-14 in coal all the time. And that's dated anywhere from 15 million to 350 million years, indicating that coal is not. It's under 80,000 years old. But you know what they say? They say, we've done the dating ourselves, and they've done the dating also. So it's both of us find the same thing. But they say it's contaminated somehow. Well, when people take samples of coal, they don't take a sample through a crack where you can have young carbon coming down in there and contaminating it. They take a pure sample of coal. So that's a pretty hollow dodge, I think. But we humored them. We decided we're going to date diamonds. Nobody has ever dated diamonds by carbon-14. Diamonds are supposed to be 2 billion years old, formed about 100 miles down in the earth and come popping up in these what's called kimberlite pipes. And we dated 12 diamonds, and guess what? We found carbon-14 in all 12 diamonds, meaning that diamonds are less than 80,000 years old. Huh. Something's wrong with the dating methods. But there's a lot more to the story. But anyway, I got off on a tangent on that, but that's the carbon-14 method. It's actually our friend. Time for maybe a couple more questions if you have any. It's getting late, and that was such a great supper. I can imagine some of you might have closed your eyes through my talk. And I can understand, because I almost closed my eyes up here.
I've got one more question if nobody else.
It appears like you get the second one, too.
Okay. Are most of these woolly mammoths or mammals facing specific directions where you can tell the wind patterns at the time that they pass away?
No. Not that I know of. I've never heard of anyone even attempting to do that. But that would be an interesting thing. I bet you they're mostly facing towards the east, because with the stronger north-south temperature difference, you'd have stronger west winds. The jet stream would be a lot stronger because it would increase as you go up. And so they're probably facing east, be my guesstimate, which is, by the way, that's a technical, a meteorological word, guesstimate. Oh, there's another question.
Yeah, I wondered, the mammoths that were found up on Wrangel Island,
Uh-huh.
are they arranged in any pattern? And could you kind of describe, or if you're familiar with their orientation of, elevation or whatever?
I'm not too familiar with it. I just know they dated them to 4,000 years by carbon-14, which is very young, because the last mammoth generally was thought to die out about 10,000 years ago. So I don't know any more details on Wrangel Island. It would be a hill when the sea level was lower in Siberia, so they'd end up stranded there, like the New Siberian Islands were the same way. They'd be hills, but they'd end up stranded there as sea level rapidly rose as the ice melted quickly. Anyway, I see Jerry with the hook in his hand, and so, so I guess it's time to end.
Should I correct myself?
mammoths are fascinating, and elephants and mastodons and all kinds of things like that, you know. And sometimes we think the size of some of the mammoths, you know, and big, the word itself, mammoth, just means huge. You know, he's a mammoth of a person. We use that term, something huge, but sometimes we don't realize that some of those animals were even bigger than the mammoths. Like, you know, hornless rhinoceros, there's several of those that were huge. And so the Ice Age animals are fascinating. It's fascinating to think about the DNA. It looks like some of the DNA may still be in some of the elephant herds in some of the provinces in northern India, the province of Bardia. For years in India, they have practiced a ritual, and during wedding services, they would have fighting elephants. They called them the fighting elephants. If you want a fascinating story and read something real, look at some of those things that they talk about, the fighting elephants of Bardia, or India. And some of those things, you begin to look at those, and I began to research it and really think about it as I find mammoth bones and around here out at Kiowa County Quarry and stuff like that, and mammoth parts and, you know, bone parts. Well, anyway, it's just, some of them are just absolutely so huge that we can't imagine it. But finding mammoth bones is kind of exciting. Really, really, really exciting and all. And some of those things you can see down at the museum. We've got real ivory, we've got real bone that we've excavated, and it's just a lot of fun. We've got stuff out in the field that we'd love to go excavate south of Bloom. There's a tusk in a bed that is an ash bed. Ash is underneath it, volcanic ash is underneath it, and on the top of it is windblown sand. And you'd have to dig down about 7 to 8 feet to that tusk. There's actually two of them. Joe Taylor, I took him down there and we looked at it. And I'm still trying to this day to get the permission to go at least excavate that and get it out of there, because it just looks like a tree log laying in the dirt down there 8 feet below the surface above an ash bed. So the mammoths were here in Kansas. All right, the Indians, the natives, probably even pre-natives, the ones in here hunting them, were here. That's one thing down at the museum. You come down and see, we can tell you the story. And part of the mural that we have, big 41-foot mural in there, painted by Joe Taylor, tells part of that story that we're finding globally. You know, the artifacts, the things, and the, you know, that in most cases fit the Bible pretty accurately, Well, we have one more day. All right, one more session. Brian, I see back there. Are you ready? He's always ready. He's never ready. All right, and so enjoying it. Come and join us tomorrow morning as he just comes to us and gives us a final charge as we kind of close out the conference. All right, and we want to thank each of you who have come participating in it. We did survive the rain today. We did make it out to the quarry. All right, we did find pretty rocks. We did find some fossil teeth. All right, at least 2 nice fossil teeth that were found. And so, again, just come join us tomorrow as we kind of wind out. Would you join me in prayer as we just close tonight? And we'll call it quits, go back and fellowship a little bit, back in the book room, and then we'll look forward to tomorrow. So join me, please, if you would. Father, I thank you for this time together just to encourage one another to learn more. Lord, and just think about the animals that you've put around us and that we're a part of that. And we as people in the midst of, you know, this grand creation, this engineering that is just so much all around us. If we just open our eyes and look, we'll see systems. And we also see that there's problems. But we understand that problem, that your nature fell. All right, that the nature things happened that just, you know, caused things to begin to decay. But you didn't want to leave it at that because you love your creation. You love us. You have made us stewards and almost like zookeepers and gardeners for this grand creation. But Lord, we know that you're going to restore it, and you're going to help us to just be restored ourselves if we'll just open up to you and let you just heal our internal being, the sorrow, the hurts and everything. And Lord, and then we have that compassion not only for other people, but we also for the animals and the things that you've put around us, and begin to see the beauty and the wonder of them. Lord, bring us back, and we just rejoice in you again, and thanking you for this great day that we've had, and thank you for the rain, for the wheat and the crops. And we just thank you in Jesus' name. And everyone said, amen. Thank you.